Well, it doesn't happen often, but every now and then one of our politicians says the quiet part out loud. It happened yesterday when Queensland Energy Minister Mick de Bruin was addressing a group of renewable energy industry leaders. He was telling them they need to resist nuclear because it's a huge threat. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is nuclear a threat? We know that research says that nuclear provides less greenhouse gas emissions than most other forms of energy, and it's very, very safe. So in what way is nuclear a threat? Or more particularly, to whom is nuclear a threat? Here's what he said.
They recently talked about lifting the nuclear moratorium. The threat of nuclear power is a moratorium on your industry, your goals, your plans, and puts its future in jeopardy. And we know the threat is real.
So there you go. The threat of nuclear energy is that it will make redundant those solar panels and wind turbines that Chris Bowen loves spending our money on. They don't want nuclear energy because it threatens to provide cheap, abundant power, the exact opposite of what they want. And so here's a Queensland government minister publicly admitting their priority is to protect their renewable pet projects from competition rather than protecting consumers from blackouts. The renewable energy lobby knows that on a level playing field, they don't get a look in. Federal politicians know it, state politicians know it, and finally, someone has come out, Liz, and actually said it.
I absolutely love it because they all know on paper this is the truth. But you know what's gone on here? The Qatar deal that we're all raging about to do with Qantas, etc. and so on, that is not a standout. That's not an anomaly. Government does deals all the time for their buddies, for their pet projects. Can you imagine the deals that have happened in the renewable sector between government and those guys making a hell of a lot of money off it? Because they ban nuclear, they stand by that ban, giving us absolutely not one intelligent argument as to why. Let's not forget, this was Bill Shorten just last month when asked the very reasonable question of, can we at least have an inquiry into using nuclear in Australia?
Why don't you have an independent inquiry into unicorns? I mean, just because someone wants to have an independent inquiry doesn't mean you have one. And this is the fairies at the bottom of the garden. Why don't we have an inquiry into flying into the sun at night time?
Pure nonsense. An insult to the intelligence of every Australian. We can't even have an inquiry into the best form of energy that's currently generating 20% of their energy generated worldwide. That's a hell of a lot of energy, and we're not hearing about any nuclear disasters. Haven't for many, many years. The technology is incredibly advanced now. We're talking about baseload power. It's affordable, it's reliable, and it's actually emissions-free. Mm-hmm. So this would blast their entire industry of renewables out of the water. They know it, and they're ripping off Australians to our faces.
Well, personally, I think Bill Shorten's onto something here. We should have an inquiry into unicorns and fairies at the bottom of the garden, because if we can actually find them, they'll do a damn better job running the country than the current government will, and maybe they'll give us nuclear energy. What I love so much about what the Energy Minister has said here, because at the very end of that clip, he says the threat of nuclear energy is real, by which he has admitted that it is economically viable. And the only argument we've ever been told by Bill Shorten and the rest of the Labor Party and the Greens and whatever is, well, there's no point lifting the moratorium because nuclear energy is not economically viable, so it ain't going to happen anyway, so get over it, bugger off, go and cry into your power bill that's gone up by hundreds of dollars every year. He said right there, the threat is real because it could actually work.
Right.
So it obliterates the argument they've been running. Yeah. So the Queensland Labor Party now has to go and talk to the Federal Labor Party and say, mate, we've got to get our message straight here because you're saying it's not economically viable. I'm saying it is economically viable. It is the biggest threat to renewable energy. I've said all along, if you seriously believe that nuclear energy is not economically viable, then that is the ultimate argument to lift the moratorium.
Correct.
Because
The market
will decide.
You'll be proven right. The market won't do it because it ain't going to work. We all know that is not what will happen.
If that moratorium were lifted, they'd be pouncing on it like a gull on a chip because they know a good thing. It would take off.
And that's what all the power companies have said. AGL's been asked about this. Would you go into nuclear? And they said, look, we haven't even thought about it because we can't do it. There's no use us investing any money in this
why waste
because
the research,
it's illegal.
et cetera,
but if you unbanned it, well, things could be very different.